Hello, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and the following will be a supplement to the lecture I did, well, last week as of this recording. I have no idea when you're going to hear this, but there was a video I did on pawn endings in the opening. So it's I looked at two different opening variations, both of which resulted in king and pawn endings as a part of really the opening theory. So this particular position arose through from the Topalov variation of the dragon, and white just played king to c2. And here I noted that black should avoid the king and pawn ending, which would begin with king f6 and rook b2, king b2, king e5, and so on, because in this position white seems to be winning by force. The plan is to play king to b4, king to b5, and c5. And it really seems as if black is too slow. All right, well, I'm not going to retread that ground. Instead, what I wanted to look at was a question from one of the viewers, Trickster99, who suggested that after rook to e8, which is the move that I recommended, king to d3, which I mentioned, rook to b8, that in fact maybe white can try something. White can play in the center. So just ignore the b pawn. Well, not completely ignore it. You have to keep it blockaded, of course, but not try to win it, but rather try to make this central pawn mass, this C, D, and E pawn, amount to something. And in fact, this is a pretty reasonable way to go. Although I think that it's not going to give white an advantage, objectively speaking. But it is an important plan, and black has to be ready to deal with this if you want to play this line with black that I'm mentioning. Okay, so from here, white has two moves. c4 is the more important move, the better move. On king to d4, I think black can just play king f6. And, okay, if rook to f1, check, king e7, rook to b1, at the very least, black could just repeat with king to f6. So let's stick to c4 here. This, I think, is the most interesting move. All right, so now rook to b3, check. Here, king to d4 is not very good because black can simply play f6. And white never has c5 because of rook to b4 check. In fact, white might even be putting himself in Zugzwang here. He can't remove the rook because of queening, and he just pushes the g pawn, and black just waits, plays king f7 maybe, or king g6, and maybe white's even in a little bit of trouble here. So this is not smart. So after rook to b3, king c2 is probably right. Rook to g3, and now white has three moves, but only one of them is really going to pose any danger. Rook takes b2 is just bad. This loses because black trades rooks and will promote the h-pawn, while black can deal with the white pawns on the queen side. So this is just a poor line. If rook to g1, then black has, I think, at least a couple of pretty good ways to proceed. I'll just mention one of them. King to f6. So king takes b2, king e5. Now, if rook f1, this just leads to general liquidation with a draw. Okay, if rook to d1, preparing c5. It's at least a little bit more interesting, but black has no real troubles here. Actually, this line is a little bit interesting, but black is able to hold. So it's just a matter of counting it out. And now black is forced away from his d pawn, but his own pawns are so far advanced that there's really no trouble here. And as we see, black queen's first, but it doesn't matter, it's a dead draw. Okay, so back to this position here. Rook to g1 is not really going to be a big threat. In fact, after that, instead of king f6, maybe h5 is even better. But anyway, they're both fine. But king takes b2 is more interesting, because now if black were to play rook takes g2, then king c3, and the white king gets active. And here I think white is much better. So black should play actively and keep white from being active. So king to f6. This is, I think, the right move. This is a good move. Now white can try three different moves here, but I think none of them really give him anything. So one try is to play rook to d1 with the idea of playing c5. The second idea is rook to h1, going after that pawn, And the third idea is rook to f1 check, trying to go after the f pawn. Okay, well, let's take a look at this one first. Rook to f1 check. All right, on this, again, active play, king e5. Now white can try either rook takes f7 or c5, but both lead to equal positions. So if c5 takes, rook f7, king e4, d6, we take this guy, and black is easily able to deal with the d pawn. He just plays rook to d8, retreats the king, and takes the pawn. And in fact, it's white who has to prove the draw at the end of the day there, which he can do without much trouble, though. Okay, instead of c5, white can also play rook takes f7, take first, push pawns later, but this too is just going to be a draw. So king d4 is a nice, accurate move. Okay, well, white can't protect the g pawn and the c pawn simultaneously. Clearly the c pawn is more important here, but white can make no progress. This is just an airtight blockade. Black can just move the rook basically wherever he wants to, keep the c pawn threatened, and white makes no progress. This is a dead draw. Okay, so that was rook to f1 check. If rook to h1, again, black activates his king. So the rook is great on g3. We don't take on g2 until it's really convenient. We've done everything we can to improve our positions in the meantime. So king to e5. Now, again, white can try two moves. If rook takes h7, then king to d4, I think, is the most accurate move, although king takes e4 should draw as well. So takes, rook f6, rook g2, rook e2, and black is going to win the d pawn, no trouble, dead draw. Okay, so white can try to be a little bit clever here with the finesse rook to h6, preventing king takes e4 or king takes d4 for that matter, but black just throws in f6, and now those same moves are coming. So it looks like it'll be pretty similar. Rook h7, king e4, rook h6, probably king to d4 is okay too. Yeah, should be basically a transposition of the other line. So king d4, rook f6, king c5, and then, okay, the other line was rook to h2 was the option if you wanted to hold the pawn. Rook f2 is a little nicer, but king takes c4 is still completely drawn, while on this, again, rook g2, followed by rook to g3, and this is just completely equal. And it's also perfectly good to play rook takes g2 here, and king e5, and this is just fine as well. So, rook h1 is not going to win either. So rook f1 didn't work, rook h1 didn't work, so let's look at rook to d1. Okay, so after rook to d1, king e5, and c5. So this is, again, the big point for white. Okay, we take d6, rook g2, king c3, rook g8, king c4. So this time it looks as if white is getting there in time. There's no easy blockade of the d pawn, it looks like, and certainly no way to round it up and win it. But black is still just in time here. King to e6, takes, rook to c8 check, and king to d7. And once again, sure enough, it's an easy draw. e5, rook e8, rook to d5, and now, okay, there are probably lots of ways to hold, but, well, actually, we have to be maybe a little careful. I mean, I suppose if we play h5, then white can play king c5, king d4, and then activate his rook. So f6 right away is a good move, not giving him time to keep everything together. So e takes f6, rook f8, and again, it's a dead draw. White can keep the d pawn for the moment with king c5, rook f6, and let's say something like this. But all right, black has any number of ways to draw. Probably the simplest is rook to f5 check. Okay, if the white king moves away, the rook goes back to f6, and on rook to d5, we just take, and push this, and that forces a draw. All right, so we see that black is holding, but it is an idea that that Trickster99 had that definitely deserved a bit of consideration. Okay, so that'll do it. Thanks a lot, and I hope this answered your question. Bye-bye.